Thanks everyone for joining us in what is our last summer session for the year. Because as we all know, as we've been working from home and doing things virtual, Plank has offered these summer sessions so that PR students, educators, and professionals have the opportunity to hear unique perspectives on important issues and, of course, the field of public relations and communications. We're thankful you've all joined us throughout the series, and we hope to continue these going forward. But for now, this will be our last summer session. And to wrap it up, we are so thrilled to have Aedhmar Hynes with us. I'm going to say a little bit about Aedhmar, but through some of the questions, we'll get to her background and her career and what she's done. But Aedhmar is amazing. She currently is on the board of three organizations: Rosetta Stone, the IP Group, and Tupperware. But for the past several years, she was a leader in our communications profession. She was ranked one of the top 50 most powerful global communication professionals in 2019 and was also inducted in the PR Week Hall of Fame last year. She most recently was the Chief Executive Officer at Text 100, one of the world's largest digital communication agencies. And she has an amazing career, and she moved very quickly, which is one of the questions I'm going to have for her. But to start, welcome, Aedhmar.
Thank you for having me
To do this.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, you grew up in Ireland, and I think I read something where you said that in your family, what we were doing and what our passion was widely and vigorously discussed. Tell us about your journey through your childhood and how that prepared you for your career.
Sure. So, yes, I grew up in Galway, which is in the west of Ireland, and I was the youngest of four children. My father was an educator, and I think he believed, he was very progressive, in my opinion, when I look back now, in that he believed life was an education. And so every experience that we had was all about, evolving and becoming who you are as a person in terms of shaping your values and your outlook on life. So one of the things that I always felt was compelling for all four of us was the fact that Dad and my mom really believed that we should pursue our passion, which I think at that point in again, going back in time, that was quite progressive. So there was no question that we would go to third level education. That was a given. In fact, my father moved to university town in order to ensure that we would be able to do that. But he never really pushed us into picking a specific career. He thought that university was going to be where we explored life and explored who we were. The thing that stood out for me, again, as I've raised four children and reflected on how I wanted to raise them, was that dinner was everything. So when he would insist we were home for dinner, and he would insist that we discussed any topic we wanted to. And he would encourage debate. Even though I grew up as an Irish Catholic, he was very willing to allow us to challenge our religion or challenge politics or challenge whatever the news of the day was. And so I found that really interesting view in that it allowed us to become who we were as people, as opposed to fitting into some formula that you have as a parent in shaping your kid's future. And I reflect now, being the youngest of four, I remember thinking that because my older siblings had more wisdom, perhaps more experience, but they always had a point of view that I felt I had to debate. And there were some times I actually went to dinner in the evening and had prepared. which I think is kind of nutty, but in some respects I felt that if I had facts and data to support my point of view, I wouldn't be dismissed as the youngest. So
that's fantastic. Well, it also speaks to, that your makeup, that you are, you think through things, you're strategic, at a very young age. I suppose you were expressing that.
Yeah. And I also think it probably underlines something about preparation for me. And And it's interesting when you look at life, because I think that, feeling that you had to be more or do more was something that I always felt in my life, which as you get older, you think, oh, was that totally necessary? But in some respects, it helped me in many occasions where over preparation certainly allowed me to feel more relaxed and comfortable in the environments I've been in.
I am somewhat similar, and I will admit, you and I have talked about this, that I feel like we kind of have lived parallel lives. And I can remember when I was on the agency side, I wanted always to make sure that I had absolutely everything the client could possibly want. And so every time they bring something out, I'm like, just a second. And I'd reach in my briefcase and I'd bring it out. And they kept saying, how deep is that briefcase? It's like the Mary Poppins bag. But the same thing, that preparedness, So that it seems to be a trait that I think marketing communication professionals have, and part of why they excel. So your passion, why marketing? Why communications? Was that early on, or did you discover it?
Oh, I discovered it, as you might expect. I mean, I was pretty young when I went to university, and I actually did my primary degree in economics because I thought it was business oriented, but then I studied English as a dual major because English was my passion, and I loved to read, and I loved poetry, and I love literature. So that to me felt like, I guess, going back to what my dad wanted, which is to explore the world, and reading and literature was a fabulous way to do that. Then I finished and wasn't sure what I had to do, what I would do. And so I went on, I was planning to go on and pursue a master's in education. But through a weird set of circumstances, I didn't get my application in on time. And so I ended up taking a year in another college to do a graduate diploma in marketing, and then went back to my university a year later to do an international marketing course. And that was really all due to the fact that that application date was probably just a bit later, and therefore I had time to pursue it. But I loved it, because what I found in marketing and in that degree, even though it wasn't something that was on my radar, it allowed me to combine that, that passion for business and how marketing becomes a discipline to support business. But at the same time, it was about storytelling. So in this kind of weird sort of way, it appealed to both my left and right side of my brain. And it was a nice, it was a nice degree to do after the English and economics. So I was like, oh wow, this is fascinating, and that started me off on the course of, how marketing would, impact business. I think after I graduated from that program, I thought I will spend a little bit of time doing marketing, communications, PR, advertising. I had this notion that to become an effective marketeer, I needed to have experience in all of the different disciplines that sat under the marketing umbrella as I had studied it. But interestingly, I ended up, after an early job in Ireland, I spent 2 or 3 years working for a startup company in Ireland. I then moved to London and thought, okay, now's my chance to join a PR agency. And I joined Text 100, which was a startup agency at the time, specializing in technology. And, found myself in an organization, because it was a startup, very entrepreneurial, very much reflected the technology industry, particularly in Silicon Valley. Bill Gates was one of our earliest clients. I found myself in this extraordinary, fast-moving, fast-paced industry, and in a company that was growing at quite a pace. And so I stayed, and I found myself...
Not only did you stay, but you, in a matter of 10 years, moved from account executive to CEO. And So tell us about that, because I think I know I rose into the executive level fairly quickly as well. And I would have a lot of people underneath me, including a lot of women, who would say, I want to follow your career. What did you do to move so fast? And I kept saying, it wasn't as much as what I did, but it was the opportunities that kind of presented themselves. So I'm wondering if it's somewhat similar with you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, first of all, I would say it was a small company when I joined it. So bear that in mind. My the opportunities were there, and I don't, if I look back now, people dismiss this point, but I don't feel like I was overly ambitious. It wasn't that I set my sight on becoming the boss. I also think that in the early stage of your career, it does feel a lot like work. But I think there were a couple of points in my early career that transitioned me from feeling this is work to feeling like it was a career. And I would say the first of those was the opportunity to manage people. I was, Text 100 was one of these organizations that gave people any opportunity that you could possibly want. In other words, there was no question that if you were a junior person that you didn't go and pitch a new client. In fact, it was expected that you would. So the over preparedness came in handy at that point in time. But it was always about being willing to take a risk. And I think that was the culture and the environment that appealed to me of Text 100, and the fact that I had opportunities to do things that perhaps I wasn't totally trained to do, but I felt, if someone else can do it, then I don't see why I wouldn't. So the opportunities that came along were as much about my own sense of wanting to embrace them and really focusing in on doing the best job I could. And I think that gets noticed. I think that if you are, very diligent, you do the best to your own capability, rather than looking around and saying, I have to be like other people, then I think that does get noticed. And I think despite the fact that I wasn't seeking promotion, it came my way by virtue of the fact that what I was doing made me quite successful early on. And
it was recognized. Yeah, I have the same philosophy, and my career kind of patterns that same thing of, if you do the best you can and you're willing to take some risks, jump in if you don't really know how to do something, when that opportunity presents itself, when there's an opening, you will be higher on the list of people of consideration because you did demonstrate those kind of traits. So that's one of the pieces of advice I give people all the time. And it sounds like you followed it as well. But I would imagine some of those risks you took were difficult to take, to make those leaps of faith. Did you ever hesitate, or did you just, are you kind of just jump in and I'll see what happens?
Oh, no, I hesitated. I mean, I don't know that you would know it on the surface, but I certainly to this day still worry. I still have those moments where I think, what on earth am I doing? And it's about self-belief. And that's why sometimes I think it's so important to surround yourself with people who believe in you. And I have to say that even for me, coming to the US was a big transition. I think this country specifically is a lot more about can do, and I know that sounds a little bit cliched, but one of the things I had been traveling to America as a student, and I had always had ambitions at some point to move here. But I will say the positivity and the encouragement and the willingness for people to help you on your journey was something that made me feel the risks were worth taking, even if I worried I wouldn't be successful. The other point I wanted to make, and I think, again, it's not part of the norm, but I ended up having children quite early in my career. And I remember feeling that a lot of agency people were in a position, to come in early in the morning and work till 8, 9, or 10 at night in the office. And I didn't have the opportunity to do that. I had to be home because I had a small child when I was quite junior in the organization. But when I reflect on it, what it did for me was give me structure. It actually meant that the hours that I was in the work environment, I had to focus and know that I had to get out on time. The other thing that it did was also, other people understood that. And so the times that I made exceptions, when there was the big pitch or there was work that had to be done, that I specifically owned or whatever, then I would always get some help and have someone else, pick up my daughter or whatever. But I reflect on it now and think it's interesting that it's important that you do set your own boundaries, whatever they may be. For me, it was picking my child up, but for other people, it may be other boundaries. But I think that is important so that people respect the time that you spend in the work environment versus assuming that you're going to work 24/7, which I think is a little bit of a slippery slope for many of us, especially in this digital world that we live in today.
So that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I, as a working mom as well, I felt like I was in many cases a better mom because I was working, but I also carried that guilt with me constantly of working. But also I felt like being a mom made me a better leader because I had more compassion to listen to other perspectives and not jump to a conclusion. It kind of like centered me a little bit more to be open to people. And I have two questions. And the first is, it's been said that your leadership style is very inclusive. And can you tell me a little bit about if that's accurate and why? And then if maybe being a mom helped you be a better leader?
Yes, I think my style is naturally inclusive to the extent that, I've never believed that I own the best ideas or have, the answer to whatever the challenge we're facing as a business is. However, I do think as a leader, there comes a point where you have to be the decision maker. And I remember during many, tough situations, whether it's economic downturn, whether it's a twist or turn in the business, where it's the loss of a major client, there is a point where people will turn to you and say, enough of the inclusivity, now tell us what to do. And that was a big learning for me, which is actually, you don't always have to have the right answer, but you do have to have an answer, and you do have to bring people along in the journey with you. So yes, inclusivity is important. I've learned more from junior, mid-level, senior peers than I could possibly tell you. And I think then you feel more confident that you have an informed opinion as opposed to an opinion that's just your own. In terms of the family and being a better mama and a better leader, I completely agree with you. I felt all my life that I was so fortunate to have a family to go home to. So, when going gets tough at work, it's so lovely to come home and be surrounded by little people who take you out of it. There is no way you can be stressing over the share price of a client or a major news story that's broken if your child needs help with your homework, if they've had a bad day. It just dispels completely that worry actually it's more than that. It grounds you in what's important in life, because actually share price goes up and down, business twists and turns in the road, but absolutely. Little people, you won't have that moment again, and you don't have that opportunity again. So that for me was why I loved being home and felt it gave me a good balance. And then on the other occasions when, home becomes equally overwhelming, and you feel like, oh my gosh, my kids are so needy. They're driving me crazy. And then there were times I could put on a suit. I could walk out that door and know that my kids would actually be fine. But then I was allowed to, go pursue more adult, things. And that just helped me always feel like both parts of my life fed each other in a really positive way.
Yeah, and it makes you whole. It allows you to express. My little example is I knew where every single penny was spent of my budgets, and I had it planned out. But at home, I was a disaster. So it really kind of allowed me to have that freedom to be all of me, depending on what role I was playing, whether I was at home or whether I was at work. And my husband would still say, "I don't know how you know all your money." But that wholeness of being able to be nurturing to my kids and being supportive of my team, which you have been described as a great mentor. In fact, Plank Center honored you in one of our milestones of mentoring, and it's to this day we've talked about it because your daughter introduced you, and it was just a memorable and touching experience to hear her talk about you. And I think we all think that we're just raising our kids, but we're kind of being mentors to them as well. And she recognized your mentorship to others, but you certainly have mentored a lot. Can you talk a little bit about mentorship and what it's meant to you, both being a mentee and being a mentor?
Mentorship is having somebody on your side and somebody who believes in you, because I think career can be lonely, and I think we can often second guess ourselves, but having somebody who believes in you gives you that tremendous confidence to take those risks that we described and to really be someone who can reflect and talk to you about the challenges that you face, and in some respects normalize them. Again, going back to this notion of it's normal, and keeps you grounded in the practicality of life, because I think while we all can face extremes in our careers and our experiences, there is a normality and there is a degree to which the more grounded you remain, the more that you can tackle and you can actually, have the confidence to pursue. So I never pursued, I guess I never had formal mentors, but when I look back at my life, there were so many people around me, whether it was my dad in the early stages of my life, or major clients, or people. I remember even when I moved to San Francisco to set up the business there, I met somebody who was a neighbor, and he was a lawyer, and I was trying to set up a business, and he gave me so much time and so much input, and allowed me to reflect on some of the challenges I was facing with him. And years later, I asked him, "Why did you give me so much of your time? I mean, there was no need." And he was like, "Well, I just was always curious how this young Irish woman who knew nothing about business in the US had come out here to set up a business." And he said, I guess it was just, I was intrigued by the proposition and therefore wanted to give up my time, because in some respects, I think he probably found it quite amusing. So I think you'll find mentors wherever you go, as long as you look up and look around you and identify people that you have respect for and think that they can help you and teach you things along the way. Within Text 100, we had a more formal mentoring program, and I mentored people in different parts of the world. But I think what it came down to, the most successful opportunities were the ones where there was a degree of where we were able to build a relationship, where there was freedom to say whatever you wanted to say. I also felt it was very important to mentor the men as much as it was to mentor women, because for me, I have a core belief. I have 2 sons and 2 daughters, and I probably place more emphasis on raising my boys to encourage women, encourage their sisters, and in future encourage their wives, but be a major supporter of women in the workplace, because I think, you know, this isn't just about women pursuing a new path. This is about how do men support women and women support men. This is about gender equality. This isn't about one gender becoming more, you know, more encouraged or more progressed than the other. I do think we have history we have to overcome. You know, we have a business and a world that's been designed for and by men in many respects. So there is that challenge. There's also obviously the biological challenge of women having children, or anything else that may face women. But I think the more that men are included in the conversation, the more they understand about the challenges, then the better outcomes we will have for the future. So mentoring men for me was equally, if not more important than mentoring women.
You know, that's interesting you say that, because I don't know, as all generations are, my generation certainly benefited so much for such of the groundbreaking women that came before to establish themselves in the working world. But I think that we are providing that as well. I have 4 boys, and ironically, I work full time. My husband stayed at home. By the time my kids were old enough, my mother worked. She worked until she was in her 80s, and my dad retired at 60 something. Rob's father, my husband's father, his mom worked until her 80s. His father was a teacher and retired early. So my boys only knew women who worked and men who stayed home and took care of them. And it was kind of even though they certainly were exposed much more to women who stayed home, I had to actually think about that for them. I had to tell them that this is a perfect example of, you may marry someone and she'll want to stay home, and you need to support that as much as if she wants to work. And I think this generation has so much of that around them to learn from. Do you think it's easier or harder then for women, a 22-year-old woman graduated from college right now? How far have we gotten in moving that along, that equality along, do you think?
I think we've come quite a long way, but I do think many of the challenges remain the same. I mean, I do think that because it's now a topic of conversation, and because it is okay to express that we're struggling, and because the topic is on the table, and there are more opportunities to find mentors, to explore it with other women and men, I think that's probably massive progress. But I do think that, you know, many of the challenges I faced, and as I said, I joined a very progressive organization, but I wonder now when I look at my daughters, you know, whether there will still be an expectation of them that is incredibly high, and whether, you know, they are best equipped to be able to deal with that. I do think it's still a tough work environment for women. So we're making huge progress, but I still think it comes down to that sense of self-belief within yourself, and you know, as I said, remaining really grounded and believing in yourself is almost more important than necessarily just what happens in the workplace. So I feel incredibly optimistic. I feel like now my daughters have opportunities that perhaps they may not have had a couple of decades ago. They have a supportive work environment, but I still think that women are facing, you know, challenges, and I think they will do for quite some time. I don't think that reaching parity or gender equality is there yet. I think we still have lots of work to do.
Mm-hmm. You talked about taking some risks before, and are there any mistakes that you were glad you made, or that were glad that happened to you, that in the end that taught you something that you never would have had be able to experience, or just a learned? I mean, I think we all have them, but are there any that stand out to you of, wow, that was a disaster at the time, but now looking back on it?
Yeah, so mistakes is an interesting word, because you know, I've never had regrets in life. I mean, it's been a crazy old life, but I look back on it and I feel like I always talk about the left and the right and the road and you know, all of those times in your life where you're faced with a major decision. And you know what? You can't look back because you've no idea if you'd taken the other path where you would have ended up. And I guess I feel in all my life, I've always felt how fortunate I am and how what a good place I'm at personally. So therefore, the word mistake is an interesting one because it suggests a regret. I suppose the times where I felt were my darkest moments were times like when I did move to the US to set up a business, and like you, I was trying to balance moving to a new country with 2 small children, being a good mom, and at the same time setting up a business and not knowing which side is up. You know, I didn't know which was the checkbook for Text 100, which was the checkbook from home. And I mean, it was a very, you know, and there's some parts of that first year that I don't even remember. I mean, it was things like going into a grocery store. You underestimate what it's like even to move to a country where we still speak the same language. And I would constantly look around for a bag of sugar and didn't realize that sugar came in boxes in America. It's like stupid things like that I would spend more time in the grocery store than I ever needed to. So, you know, that was a crazy year. And much of it, I think I dragged myself through, and probably, you know, it might have been a mistake to have done it. But when I look back on how that shaped, you know, my time since then, and what an extraordinary learning experience it was in that first year, and going back to those mentors, how many great women I met who were stay-at-home moms, but who went out of their way to help me to figure out stuff. And that probably was one of the most pivotal transitions in my career that was absolutely the toughest, but equally the one that I learned most from, and probably again set me up for an ability and a tolerance to accept, you know, any challenge that came my way with a view that I can get through it, you know, one step at a time.
I love that. I think even you saying, I don't even remember those first years, I think it's hard to tell someone young, our kids are somewhat similar as they're starting in their careers, and it's so tough on them right now. And to tell them, you're going to look back on this and you're going to be amazed you got through it, but at the same time, you're going to not think of it as this hard. It's going to be somewhat of a blur. And so I like to think that when you're starting out in your career, sometimes it just feels, to your point earlier, it feels like work, or it feels like I can't get through this, but you will look back on it and say, that was so amazing that I did get through it. It gives you that self-confidence a little bit. So I love that you say that. Is there any, you know, you also led Page through being your chairmanship at Page, which was amazing. And you took Page, you changed the branding of Page. They did some amazing thought leadership during that. A lot of what we're trying to do with Page and Plank is bring this new generation and develop them into communications professionals and in public relations. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you hope for the profession and the young people that are going through it today?
Well, reflecting now on my career and the trajectory in communications, I've, you know, for a long time, I looked at it as PR, you know, as we all do, dealing with the media, managing and shaping news, making sure we engage with our stakeholders, and communicating the best on behalf of the organization that I was working for. What I began to realize much later, and a lot of my work with Page helped support this notion that actually communication is probably one of the most important business imperatives for the success of an organization. And the thing that excites me most is that through this great confluence of technology impacting the way we communicate, communications is everything. It shapes our opinion, but it goes much deeper into understanding who we are as individual and engaging with us in a way that I think, you know, has tentacles to everything that we are in life. So I'm also very much of the opinion that communications can be at the core of who an organization is, not just what it is. If I think back, it was a lot about, you know, launching products and, you know, making sure that people understood what the company did, as opposed to who the company is. And so, you know, just even over the last few years, our work on thought leadership at Page was the realization that many companies are at an existential moment. They need to have a sense of who they are as much as what they are. And that to me would be the exciting thing if I were embarking on a career in communications, is through digital and social media, there are so many ways to directly communicate with your key stakeholders, but also what you are engaging with them is now more powerful than ever. Companies who are discovering their purpose, their place in the world that extends way beyond making profit, but really what their contribution is to society, to employees, and to the greater good. And so that to me is probably some of the most powerful things that I probably wouldn't have recognized earlier on, but I see now as being core to this industry, the power to shape and really impact a business in a way more powerful way than I think we ever did before.
Mm-hmm. You were able, in your career, you had both the agency side, obviously, but you also started your career, I think, on a more of a client side, correct? Or understood the client side of it. How important do you think it is? I told you this, I have a perspective on it myself, but how important do you think it is that you get agency experience as you're going through your career?
Oh, I do think it's critical to get agency experience. And that's not to suggest that I think just an entire corporate career is not equally as good. The things that you benefit from as an agency person is the ability to be able to, first of all, learn about multiple different companies. And, you know, as an agency person, I often felt that, you know, in one client situation, I learned something that was of value to me to contribute to another organization. It was that powerful ability to be in a continual learning environment, because multiple clients will give you different perspectives, different views that really shape who you are as a consultant. I also had to juggle a lot. And I think that, you know, going back to the parent work piece, but, you know, juggling different client priorities and being able to set those parameters and deadlines was another thing that was very important for me. But ultimately, I think what the agency world gave me was, multiple careers within one, if you like. If I think about my early career, granted, I did work predominantly in technology, so there was that thread through it, but I loved learning about, new parts of the technology industry. When I was involved in working with IBM and shaping that, brand positioning, working with multiple different CEOs, it felt to me that it was a constantly new things happening and new opportunities to get involved in and to set my mind to, that notion we often talk about, which is constant curiosity. It was, that curiosity was satisfied a lot in the agency world, because you always, if there was a pitch or a new piece of business, you always had to learn and deeply get into the business of the company that you were going to pitch in order to be informed and educated. And that to me was something that was really powerful about working at an agency. It was the fast pace, but it was also the continual learning of new companies and having the opportunities to get, you know, deeply involved in them, but not just one company, many different ones.
Well, I like what you said also about taking that learning and being able to apply it to something else. You know,
Yeah.
I think that is, you can't take that for granted in whatever role you're in, but particularly from an agency side, because you do have such a disparity of companies, not only maybe in what they do, but their cultures and their approach to things, and being able to think it through and how things can transcend all of those things if they're really just a good way of doing business. So that you obviously are a constant learner, and I would imagine that goes to just being a mentor, and one of the things that you are as a mom as well is to be open to that, which does come back to what I see as your leadership style is you are very open. You don't you seem to really be able to take in a lot and then make decisions. But is that, you know, is that one of the traits? If you had to say, what are the 3 traits that you're so glad that you have that you can apply, what would those be? Curiosity, or you've spoken to a number of them, but which ones do you think really served you best?
Definitely, I think the curiosity piece is really important, and the belief that you know, I think I will, you know, it's that notion of, you know, when is enough enough? I hope till the day I die I'm still learning. I mean, I love it, and I love the notion that I'm evolving, you know, both professionally and personally. But I think one of the other things that I can't remember who told me early on, but I remember being able to tackle really major problems in a way that allowed me to get through it. It's that step-by-step process, I guess. I think where I always, my mantra was always, there's no problem that's too big to solve if you break it down into bite-sized pieces. In other words, the enormity of something can, you know, stop you in your tracks, and, you know, at times, you know, make you fearful of your ability to get through it. But this notion of taking that big problem and taking it into bite-sized pieces, and solving them one at a time, prioritizing, saying which is the biggest issue. Don't worry about the impact of that decision, just tackle it. And then the outcome of that will help you to tackle the next piece and the next piece and the next piece, until, by the way, you look in your rear view mirror and you're like, wow, we've come such a long way with that big problem that seemed so insurmountable. So that, the notion of getting to the root of an issue and really understanding what is best to solve initially, and then allowing that to inform you, was a big part of I guess perspective, and allowing me to be able to believe that I can get through it. So I don't know if that's necessarily a quality or just something that I learned over time, but it certainly helped me to overcome some of the things that I think we often, as I said, feel like, oh gosh, how am I ever going to get through this?
And that's for anything in life, right? So that is such a valuable approach to looking at it. And I think it is, some of that's innate if you just automatically think that way, but I think that's something you can really apply and learn, and be supported in, and just saying, take it bite by bite, as you said, bit by bit, and before you know it, you've accomplished so much. My last question, because we could go on forever, my last question is, what you've had a phenomenal career, you have a huge career yet ahead of you. What's on that bucket list? What do you want to still accomplish, both maybe professionally and personally, in the coming years?
Well, I'm feeling I'm feeling very fortunate about where things stand today. I stepped down some 18 months, 2 years ago from the role as CEO of Text 100, and I decided that I wanted to tackle this notion of getting on public boards. And despite, again, this is going back to the gender issue, despite the fact that there is a huge focus on getting women on boards right now, it is still incredibly challenging, because there's this, we're stuck in this loop where if you haven't had experience of serving on a public board, it's hard to get your first opportunity. And so I wanted to tackle that. And so I put a lot of my energy and intention on a plan on how I would tackle that. And
surprise, you had a plan. So
I had
a
plan.
Yeah.
Going back to my consulting and agency experience, you have to have a plan. You have to have objectives. You have to tactics. You know, so I went after it in quite a methodical way, and managed to break through. And again, you know, it's a surprising. It's been a surprising experience, but I think the thing that I have loved about being on boards and being in a position to influence these organizations goes back to what I talked about before, which is purpose. You know, it is an incredibly powerful place to introduce the notion of who we are as a company. Also, one of the boards that I sit on is based in London, and the London Stock Exchange has now introduced this concept of formally having a board director in charge of employee engagement. And you have to report on employee engagement in the same way you have to report on results in the annual report, which I think is incredibly progressive. I think that's a sentiment in the US, but not yet formalized in the same way. And so, you know, employee engagement leads to culture, leads to the notion of, you know, a healthy workplace and so on. And that's been powerful. So I am loving the notion of being in a position of influence at a board level, of helping to shape a company in the manner that a board director can. People have said to me, it must be really hard because, you know, being a CEO, you were, you know, you then got to do it. You didn't just, you know, advise on it, you got to do it. I'm actually fine with that. It's actually great. It probably goes back to my consulting experience. It's great to consult, but I don't have that passionate desire day in, day out to actually implement. So that's the professional side of things. I think on the personal side, I still have a notion of fulfilling some of my other, probably more creative elements of my personality, you know, whether that's, you know, opening a restaurant and being a chef, or doing something more on the artistic side. I'm not sure yet, but I'm grateful of the time that I have to be able to think about some of those other things that might surprise me, just because I'm curious and I would love to do more outside of the business world.
That's great. Well, we're grateful that, first of all, that you agreed to do one of our summer sessions and wrap up our season with it. But also thank you for everything you did for the profession through Paige and everything else you've done in your mentorship. We are a stronger profession because of people like you who really enjoy giving back and growing and developing people. And we have such a good group of people coming up in the profession right now that hopefully will benefit from the work of Paige and Plank and everything we're all doing in individuals. So thanks, Aedhmar. I love talking with you. I love when we come across each other, and hopefully soon this pandemic will be over and I'll get to see you in person soon.
Exactly. And over a glass of wine, I hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Enjoy your day. And I hope you get to express some sort of creativity today.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I really enjoyed the session. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.